So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for giving up your evening time to let's talk rules. And this week we're going to look at Rule 13, the attack hit. Okay, so without further ado, same as usual, the purpose of the session is to look at Rule 13, attack hit, and this rule deals with the characteristics of the attack hit, the restrictions on the attack hit, and faults of the attack hit. And we'll look at the rule text. There's not so much from the guidelines on this one, and there are a few casebook examples, but not many. But I've managed to find a bit of video to talk about some various points around the rule. So the basis of the rule is to deal with what constitutes an attack hit and how that player is controlled. So the common situation of this rule is where the player is when they contact the ball, where the ball is when the player contacts the ball, and where the ball has come from when the player contacts the ball. Those are the three fundamental issues that we have to consider in looking at the attack hit and its restrictions, and therefore the faults that may occur. And both first and second referees should understand this rule well, because both of you, both first and second, have a role in controlling aspects of the attack hit, and it's within both referees' responsibilities for certain elements of the faults to be whistled. And you need to work as a team, and we'll get to one of the key points as to why it's good to work as a team on the attack hit, certainly the back row attack hit, in a minute. Okay, so how does it link with other rules? We've already explored a lot of rules that have brought together the basis of play, and the attack hit now starts to link some of those things together, and it also introduces points for future rules. So fundamentally, Rule 8, ball is out or in. Rule 9 on playing the ball, consecutive and simultaneous contacts, and the characteristics of the hit. Rule 10, the ball at the net and its retrieval from the opponent's free zone. We're not going to talk about 10.1.2 this week. Rule 11, reaching beyond the net and when that is permitted and not. And then Rule 14, the block, which we'll talk about next time, about blocking in the opponent's space and faults in blocking. And then finally, rules around the libero and the restrictions on the libero in playing the ball. So those are the other rules. And what I'm not going to do, I'm not going to go through the rules that we've already explored in some depth as we go through this. But I have used one or two videos again to show how the same situation impacts a number of different rules. So let's have a think about what is an attack hit. Now, here's 6 different situations of playing the ball. We've got the dig. We've got the similar sort of dig from the side. We've got a ball which is difficult to control, which is being used by 2 hands above the head, maybe a first pass that. We've got a tip, we've got a spike, and we've got a volley. So which of those is an attack hit? Well, the simple answer is they all could be attack hits. Okay, so when we're thinking about what is an attack hit, we're not talking about specifically a ball which is spiked or tipped. Okay, so let's get straight into the characteristics, and this gives us the key definition that we should all know. So the characteristics of the attack hit are all actions which direct the ball towards the opponent, with the exception of service and block, are considered as attack hits. And it goes on to tell us about how the ball is contacted. During an attack hit, tipping is permitted only if the ball is cleanly hit and not caught or thrown. And if we remember from Rule 9.2.2 from the guidelines talk about the thrown ball involving 2 playing actions, the catch and then the throw. And the guidelines go on to say that the first referee must watch the tip closely to ensure that it's an instant rebound and that the ball is not accompanied by the hand or thrown, which is a fault and must be penalised. So we've got our basis of our definition of the attack hit. All actions which direct the ball towards the opponent, with the exception of service and block, are considered as attack hits. Okay, and then the final part of the characteristics is about when the attack hit is completed. An attack hit is completed at the moment the ball completely crosses the vertical plane of the net or is touched by an opponent. And it's very important that the final characteristic is seen, because unless the attack hit is completed, then the faults of the attack hit are not faults. Because in a situation whereby the attack hit may be the second team hit, if it's not completed off the second team hit, then the ball is still in play. And therefore, you must ensure that all elements of the attack hit are finished before you can then judge the faults of the attack hit and whether the restrictions have been adhered to. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick look at a first video. You might have seen this one before. And this is about what is and isn't an attack hit. And I'm not attempting to try and bring in the rules on blocking at this point. This is just simply, is this an attack hit or not? Okay, so let's just have a look at this one. It's in slow motion. Okay, now in this instance, we can see that the blocker has gone up to cover it. Now, obviously, the player here, number 10, is making a very strong point towards the referee and totally disagrees with the referee's view. So we have to think about what is it and isn't. So is it an attack hit? Well, it's not an attack hit because or an attempt at that, because it's not been it certainly wasn't completed. There wasn't any the other elements of it which are key here are the blocking action, and we remember that the block is attempting to intercept a ball coming from the opponent by reaching higher than the top of the net. Well, I think that number 18 has actually met all of the elements of a block in that action and none of the elements of an attack hit. So therefore, in this instance, you could quite easily say that whether that is the correct decision by the first referee, and it was. And I hope that the first referee then used his yellow card to deal with the player's behaviour, which, you know, hopefully that's what happened. So let's look at another situation. Okay, and this one is similar. Is this an attack hit? Now, we saw this one last time about reaching beyond. Okay. So if this was not an attack hit, then the player on the to the right hand side would have been penalised for reaching beyond. Okay, and the reason that it is acceptable for that player to block in the opponent's space is because if we remember the rules around reaching beyond is you're allowed to play the ball in the opponent's space as long as it is after the attack hit. So in this instance, if we just go back to the section that's important here, we can see from the slow motion camera and from the main action that the ball has got forward motion on it, off player number 11, and therefore it's acceptable to consider that was an attack hit that was completed by the moment of it hitting the block. Now, I'm not going to show the vast numbers of videos of people executing attack hits, because I'm sure that most of us have seen enough attack hits in our volleyball career to know what most of them look like. But the play around the net is very important, that you know that when you're thinking about, particularly when you're looking at the back row, that you understand that any ball which is directed towards the opponents that would cross the vertical plane of the net can be considered to be an attack hit. And you've got to understand which way the ball is going in order to determine whether it is an attack hit or not. So let's move on. So restrictions of the attack hit. So the second part of the rule splits the restrictions between front row players and back row players. So restrictions for a front row player. A front row player may complete an attack hit at any height, provided that the contact with the ball has been made within the player's own playing space, except rules 13.2.4 and 13.3.6. So 13.2.4 is that no player is permitted to complete an attack hit upon the opponent's service when the ball is in the front zone and entirely higher than the top of the net. And the second part that it's referred to there is that they're not allowed to attack hit a ball coming from an overhand finger pass by a libero player. But we'll talk about that when we get to the faults of this particular rule. The reason I put the rule in here about at this point about the opponent's service is because simply it's most likely that if you ever saw this fault occur, it would be probably a front row player that would be trying to do it, in the same way that a front row player is not allowed to block the opponent's service either. There is, as you wouldn't be surprised to know, that there is no video of a situation of anybody attempting to attack it an opponent's service. I think it would have to be set up to get a video example of it. But let's move on to the back row player. So the back row player's restrictions are that they may complete an attack hit at any height from behind the front zone. So at the takeoff, the player's foot or feet must neither have touched nor crossed over the attack line. But afterwards, the player may land within the front zone. And the back row player may also complete an attack hit from the front zone if at the moment of the contact, a part of the ball is lower than the top of the net. So we're now starting to see what the key elements of the attack hit rules is going to be. Okay, so let's just think about what we need to know about front and back row players. So within our toolkit, we have a section in our referee toolkit about know the back row. And the higher level of competition, the more frequent the number of attacks from the back row become. Okay, so referees must have a process for identifying your back row players. And one process that may help is something that I try and do is we talked when we looked at positions, rule 7, we talked about identifying your directing player to make sure that you knew where the setter was at all times. Okay, because it's really important that you know where the setter is. And if you can know where the setter is, then you'll know who the non-setters are in the back row. And if the setter is in the front row, then there are mainly two possible options in the back row, one of which is the setter's opposite, and one of which will be the outside hitter. Now, you may have a middle player there, or if you're in service, if you're serving, or it could be a libero if you're on reception. And sometimes in the National League, you'll see teams that don't employ liberos. So you may have 3 players there, but generally the middle player is not one to worry too much about. If the setter is in the back row, then most often there is only one attack option from the back row, because you will have, in most cases, the outside hitter, and you will have a libero. And then the other way to look at it is to say, well, because I haven't got too many problems with knowing what's going on in the front row, I don't really need to know who those players are. I really actually need to know all the time who is in the back row. So therefore, you could ignore the front row players and just focus your attention on who is back row. And therefore, in that situation, you will therefore get a few situations whereby you have to determine, or your mind is going through as to whether a player is front or back row, because if you focus on the back row, then you get to know the players quite quickly. So the common situations that the back row causes you an attack hit fault are with the back row setter volleying the ball. So remember that because it is any ball which is directed towards the opponent, if the setter jumps in the front zone to volley the ball, to set the ball to one of the attackers, if the ball is misdirected and its direction is towards the opponent, then as soon as it crosses the plane of the net or is contacted by a block, then that easily could be a back row attack hit situation where you may have to make a decision. The second one is that the back row outside hitter is in the pipe. Difficult one to see, but it's one that you need to identify when it may occur. And also the opposite, who goes through position one. And these are all situations that occur quite often. I just wanted to have a look at the knowing the back row. What I meant by knowing the back row is, if we look at these three rotations, this is the setter moving around the court from one across the back row, and then it's going to, the setter is going to, in the next slide, the setter will come across the front row. So the top court, our court A, is going to be serving, and the light, that's the green court, and the white court is the reception. So the setter is always in the same position in both on both courts. So the teams are rotating in the same order. So when the setter's at one, we can see that the libero, it will have generally replaced the middle two, and therefore the only player that we have to be concerned about in that position is the outside hitter, who's at 5. Yeah. Then on the reception side, we have exactly the same situation. We have a setter that is most likely going to be penetrating position from 1, position 2, and therefore they will only have one outside hitter, again at position 5. And as you follow the setter across the court, you can see that when the setter is at 6, again, there is one back row player. When the setter is at 5, then when you're serving, you have the middle, who's just come back to serve. And in general, you will still focus on the outside hitter that's been there all the time. On the reception side, you've still got the libero in that position, because it's on reception, you've gone through the service where the middle has gone back to serve and has left the court for libero. When the setter moves round onto the front row, so when they're at position 4, you now have the situation where you have 2 players in the back row to consider, one of which is the outside hitter you've been keeping an eye on for some time, and also the opposite to the setter. Okay, and that situation stays throughout until you get to the point when the setter's at 2 and your middle is now serving, and you can again largely probably ignore the middle. Now on the reception side of it, all you've got to remember is what's going on, and you've got 2 players again. Once you get to the setter at 3 and at 2, you've got 2 players that you're concerned about. One is the outside hitter, who's going to be playing the pipe, running the pipe, and the opposite, who's going to be running round through position 1. And that's generally what's going to be happening. And there are other, obviously, reception patterns, but these are the most common. And therefore, when you're looking at the back row, all you're trying to do is focus on a couple of players throughout the whole of the rotation of the teams. And that way it's much easier to control who is the back row than it is to try and work out where everybody is on both teams and try and remember all 12 positions. I'm just suggesting that's one way of doing it, but it is something that you need to understand so that when you do get a situation where there is potentially a restriction on the hit, you know whether this is going to be a fault or not, and you make that decision at a timely point in the rally, i.e. when the ball crosses the plane of the net or contacts the block. So let's consider what the faults of the attack hit are, and this is the crux of this particular rule. So there are 6 faults of the attack hit, and the one we've already talked about a lot is a player hits the ball within the playing space of the opposing team. So this is the fault of reaching beyond the net, diagram 20, and the most obvious one is that the player then hits the ball out. Okay, so and we're not going to consider any any videos or situations of a player hitting the ball out. You'll be pleased to know. But when we're talking about hitting the ball in the opponent's space, let's just remember what we're talking about. So we looked at this last time, but this is just a quick refresher. So we're not going to spend a great deal of time on these ones. So here we have USA attacking, and the ball comes off the block, and then number 11 contacts the ball in the opponent's space. The ball never comes off the block and back into the USA space. So there is no attack hit completion. So therefore, the ball cannot be blocked and the ball cannot be attacked. It's still within the Turkey side of the court. Let's move on. Here's another one that we've seen before. Very similar situation. Okay, so there, the ball again went parallel to the court, and in the referee's view was that the ball was contacted in the opponent's space. Okay. So I think that slow motion shows that was a good call. Okay, so these are the simple ones of playing the ball in the opponent's space, and you need to just understand that some of the times this is just merely where the player is trying to be too eager to follow a ball over the net and get a block in case the ball is going to be blocked back at them, and you just need to watch those positions. Okay, so in this one. Okay, so here this one is clear. Okay, again, as a referee, you have to decide whether the ball was going to go over the net, so that whether that player could then play the ball. In that instance, it's absolutely not clear that the setter was going to be in control of the ball, so therefore there was no need for the player to play the ball in the opponent's space. And again, this is the fault of reaching beyond the net. Okay, so as I said, we're not going to spend a great deal of time on them. Let's get on with the important parts of this rule. So faults, the attack hit has to be completed. Okay, so these are the other 4 faults. A back row player completes an attack hit in the front zone if at the moment of the hit the ball is entirely higher than the top of the net. A player completes an attack hit on the opponent's service when the ball is in the front zone and entirely higher than the top of the net. A libero completes an attack hit if at the moment of the hit the ball is entirely higher than the top of the net. And a player completes an attack hit from higher than the top of the net when the ball is coming from an overhand finger pass by a libero in his or her front zone. So you can see that I've highlighted the same phrases in every single one of these faults, and that is that the attack hit has to be completed, and that at the moment of the attack hit, the ball has to be entirely higher than the top of the net. And there are some other elements in there as well, but those are the two that appear in all 4 faults. So for all of these faults, the first or second referee would use the attack hit fault, diagram 21, as you know. And note that this is a vertical arm and it bends at the elbow to bring the hand horizontal. Okay, it's not a sweeping gesture or anything, it's just a vertical arm that's brought down with a horizontal hand across the face. Okay, and just remember that if the second referee is calling the fault, then they may need to indicate the player, and the first referee may need to indicate the player as well in this situation, and then follow the first referee on which side has service. Now, not all of these faults within the attack hit faults are the responsibility of both referees. So if we consider which referees can call which faults, then we'll see that the player hits the ball in the playing space of the opposing team. This is a first referee fault. The ball is above the top of the net. Okay, the player hits the ball out. Mainly this is first referee, but there are some instances for the second referee. For example, the ball hits the net post, ropes, antenna, etc. on the second referee's side of the court or an outside object. But then we get to the 4 rules we've just looked at. So a back row player completes an attack hit from the front zone. Okay, so this is both referees can call this fault. Now the second referee needs to be careful here because it has to be absolutely clear that the ball is higher than the top of the net. And remembering, as the second referee, you are standing on the floor, you are not always in the best place to see whether the ball is higher or it is merely in line with the top of the net. So just because the ball is higher than the player doesn't automatically mean that it's higher than the top of the net. And your perspective on the play may make it look as though it's higher when it possibly isn't. And the first referee may have already made a decision on that. So this is when I talked about the first and second referees need to be working together on this. Sometimes it's absolutely obvious the ball is higher than the top of the net, and other times it's not so. And if it's not so obvious, then it's when the 2 referees need to get some eye contact together just to make sure that, you know, the second referee, if you think it's been an illegal back row attack, that the first referee has actually seen it and decided it's not. It's not. Now, I'm not suggesting you do this, but I tend to just do this sort of horizontal hand gesture to say that I've seen it and I've decided that it's not high enough. And that way I try and do that to ensure the teams or the coaches can see that I've seen the fault and I've made a decision which they may have a different opinion on, but it's not that I've missed the fault, it's I have decided differently. Okay, so the second one, point 4, the player completes an attack hit on the opponent's service. This is a first referee fault, and as I say, probably has very, very rarely ever occurred. Now, obviously, as soon as the ball drops below the top of the net, then it can be then an attack hit can occur. So, for example, if the front row players, the ball is short, it just drops over the net, and the front row players see that the serving team are a little bit asleep, then they may just volley it straight back, as long as they play that ball below the top of the net. So just remember that it's only the issue is where is the ball hit. The libero completes an attack hit if at the moment the hit of the ball is entirely higher than the top of the net. Then this is one which could be either referee, but I would advise the second referee probably not to get involved in this one and leave it up to the first referee to determine the height. And then a player completes an attack hit from higher than the top of the net when the ball is coming from an overhand finger pass by a libero. This is a first referee responsibility only. It is not in the second referee's responsibilities. So second referees, if you see it, you may wish to give guidance, but you cannot call this fault yourselves. Okay, and the reason for that is that most often the libero will be dealing with the first pass, and the second referee's responsibility is the net, not the libero or the reception of the first pass. Okay, so as a second referee, your first and foremost responsibility is to watch the net and to continue watching the net until the playing action has ended at the net, including the landing and any penetration may occur. So whilst you're doing that, the chances are you're not going to see the first contact, or even maybe the second contact in some situations. So the reason that you don't have the responsibility to call the libero in the front zone is simply because you've got other job that is more important to be doing. So let's have a look at a couple of examples, and this is an attack hit which has been called by the back row player in the front zone, called by the second referee, and you can tell me what you think about this one at the end. So Stuart, if we can let people have a so we'll let it play out. So if we have a look at this, comes into slow motion, you'll see that maybe, what do we think?
If you wanted to either pop your hand up or pop a comment in the chat, you're more than welcome to.
Let's just consider perspective again. Yeah, so I'll just play it through again. So just think about perspective of the first referee and the second referee. So it may be in this instance, the first referee actually saw this and decided that, you know, it really is far too close to be considering what's going on. But the second referee has looked at this and has decided to have a look through underneath the net at the point of takeoff of the back player there, and he's decided to call it and okay. So these are quite difficult, and this is where we talk about the three referees having good cooperation. Okay, and it's not very clear on this video, but let's see if I can stop it at the right moment. Yeah. So that's showing you how close it was. So it's pretty close. Okay, let's see if we can go back. Right. Oh, let's get rid of that. Right. Now, at this point in the play, as a first referee, you're looking to see, well, the ball is going to come straight back down on our setter, who's in the back row. So we've got a back row setter. So at this point, we have got four potential attackers here. Okay, we've got the three front row players, and we've got the player on the pipe. The ball is coming down, and if we just let this come on just a few frames. So at this point, the setter is just played the ball, and all four attackers are still in play here. We're just now waiting to see which one of them the setter is using, as all three of the front row attackers are about to become airborne, and the back row player who's coming through the pipe is also become airborne. Now, as a first referee, at this point, you are just watching the contact of the ball by the setter. It's only after the setter has played the ball that it is obvious to you as a first referee which player is going to be playing the ball next. By the time you see which player is going to be playing the ball next, that player is also airborne. So you've now got a back row player who is already in the air, who's going to attack a ball in the front zone, over the front zone. And if you were watching the contact of the setter with the ball closely, you may have missed the point at which the back row player last contacted the floor. And it's really difficult to see sometimes. It may also be that you've got a player in the way, you've got a middle or somebody who's actually in the way, and you can't actually see past them to see that foot contact. So in this situation, it is quite difficult for the first referee to think, okay, I've now got to compute which player have I got to focus on. So in this situation, first and second referees can work well to know, well, actual fact, if I know this team uses the pipe a lot and does this play a lot, then both of you may always be looking for this particular fault and the feet of the middle. And therefore the second referee here, because the block is not going to take off yet, can also have a quick look under the net at the middle player, at the outside hitter in the back row, to determine whether that player is legal or not. Because for the first referee's perspective, it could be difficult to see. So I can move this on. So here's another example. And in this example, this is when I'm talking about perspective of so quite often you'll get teams, as soon as you get this middle back row pipe situation, you may get teams that immediately say this is clearly a false. Hang on, this is the one I wanted. Okay, so you get teams that immediately say, what is that there was an attack hit fault, and it's sometimes not clear whether there was or there wasn't. But let's look at the USA here. So in this instance, Australia have challenged the back row attack fault. I think if you were watching the player quite clearly, you saw that he had a good foot and a half maybe of space between him and the line attack line when he played it. And maybe Australia in this instance had actually run out of timeouts and just wanted a breather. So you can see that from one side of the court, somebody there has probably decided that was an illegal back row attack and has persuaded the coach to burn one of their challenges in having a look.
Nick, there were just a couple of questions, and if you want to pause now to go over them.
So key points about the fault, and we'll come back to some other examples in a minute. Know the definition, okay? So it involves two actions. The attack hit must be completed. The ball must be higher than the top of the net when the attack hit is made. And the guidelines make only 1 point on this, and they say when controlling the backward player and the attack hit of the libero, it's important to understand that such a fault is committed only if the attack hit has been completed. Either the ball completely crossed the vertical plane of the net or was touched by one of the opponents. If a second team hit is played in a way that it could have been an illegal back row attack and the attack hit is not completed, then the ball is still live. Okay, so you need to remember, higher than the top of the net, it must be completed. So just because you've seen, oh yes, the back row player has foot was in the front zone, and they've hit the ball higher than the top of the net. Great, this is an illegal back row attack. I'm ready to whistle this fault. and then the player actually hits the ball straight into the net, by which time you've just whistled and are signalling your illegal back row attack fault, and that fault has not occurred. So you just need to remember that you must see it completed. The second point, and the really is really important, is the height of the ball. It's so important to get the ball is entirely higher than the top of the net. Just because a player jumps does not make the ball higher than the top of the net. Yeah, and just because a libero may play the ball above their head doesn't make it a libero attack hit fault. Okay, you've got to remember that this is, and the libero, this could be anywhere on the court, for the libero. It doesn't have to be front zone, it could be back zone, wherever. So you've got to be absolutely certain that that ball is higher than the top of the net to call it against the libero. And just remember that just because a player is off the ground doesn't automatically make them higher than the top of the net or the ball higher than the top of the net. Now, in most cases, in top-level international men's volleyball, if the player's off the ground, they're tall enough, most likely they are, and the ball is. But you've got to remember that some of them are quite cute at being able to work out, I can't attack this, I might have been over the line, and therefore they can collapse their position and still contact the ball legally. So just remember, just because the player jumps, just because the libero hits the ball above their head, doesn't make it automatically a fault. So let's have a look at a situation. So what I want you to look at is you've got a penetrating setter for the team ball. Okay. So what did we think in that situation? Okay, the setter was the front zone, and she played the ball over the net. Watch it again. See if we can try to stop it at the right moment. Okay, so what do we think about that situation?
Nacho, so you've got your hand up there. Would you like to share your thoughts?
It's a bit difficult because we cannot see the top of the net. It looks like it might be an attack fault.
It's certainly a situation that you've got to think about it, isn't it?
Yeah, but as I say, especially because I cannot see the top of the net because of the antenna is in the way.
Yeah.
But it looks like it is, probably.
So in that situation, you could say, I've seen it and I've decided it's not, or you could make the decision and say, absolutely, it is. Let's call the fault. So either way, you just need to be clear as to what you're going to do. There's a bit of a help here. I don't know whether you can use the top of the tribune or the walled panel behind the court to give you a sort of a marker as to where you think the top of the net height would be in terms of perspective. But remember, again, you're 50 centimeters above the net. So again, you're looking down on this situation. So it's one of those ones where you need to kind of get a perspective against something in the gym and say, right, okay, that's my marker. If the ball is above that, then I believe it to be higher than the top of the net, and make a decision. In this one, you could have gone either way. The referee obviously clearly decided that this wasn't a fault. I'm assuming that the referee saw it. So this is one where you might go to the teams. You know, I've seen it. It's fine, and just let them know that you've seen it, and carry on. It's an interesting one. Let's have a look at another situation. Oh, so these are libero attacks. Okay, some of them are a bit not so helpful. I couldn't find too many of them, but clearly in this situation, the player has. Let's go back to that one. Where is it? I'll find it again. There we go. So we can see from that one that the libero doesn't leave the ground. They stay standing, and all they do is hit the ball above their head. Most of the liberos are not particularly tall players, so even standing on the ground, hitting the ball above their head, they probably are going to be lower than 243. So in this instance, just because the libero is playing the ball above their head, doesn't mean that that this would be a fault. Okay, so the next key point is the feet. So in the rules of game, we have a diagram, and this diagram shows ABC here. So A is perfectly legal, and then B shows that the foot of player B is on the attack line, with saying that they're all back row players, and therefore that is a fault. And that C, again, in that case, both feet are over the attack line in the front zone, and the attack hit has been completed by a block. That little squiggle in the net line suggests that there's a block there. Okay, and if we remember back to rule 7.4.3 about the positions of players on the court, that their positions are determined and controlled according to the positions of their feet, or the last contact of the foot with the ground. And it's exactly the same situation in determining the player's position in relation to the back row attack. So the libero. So let's just think. So the libero completes an attack hit if at the moment of the hit the ball is entirely higher than top of that. We've talked about that one. And then we have the player completes an attack hit from higher than the top of the net when the ball is coming from an overhand finger pass by a libero in his or her front zone. So it's really important to understand, fully understand 13.3.6. The fault only occurs if the libero is playing a controlled overhand finger pass. If they are reaching, if they are under duress, if they are trying to shield themselves, if the ball just hits them, and the ball then goes higher than the top of the net as attacked, that is not a fault under this rule. It is only where the libero makes a controlled volley finger pass that this fault is occurring. Okay, and note that the rule focuses on the position of the libero and the position of the ball. It does not talk about the position of the attacking player. It's not relevant to this rule. Okay, so this is that if the libero is in the front zone and makes an overhand finger pass and the ball is still higher than the top of the net, it cannot be attacked anywhere on the playing area because it will be a fault. Okay, so it's nothing to do with the fact that you'll see the situation where some liberos believe that if they suddenly realise they're in the front zone, they may set the ball to a back row player who's clearly in the back in the back zone. That is still a fault under 13.3.6. It's the position of the libero and the ball and not the attacking player that is the issue. So you have to know which elements of the rule are the important ones. Okay, let's have a look at a couple of examples. So in this instance, Erdil Akinci of Turkey, there, the first referee, is it couldn't have been more obvious to them. There was the libero was stood almost right in front of him, so it was quite an easy call, and it's one where the attacking player needs really to remember where they are and where the balls come from. That's a clear example. It does occur in that situation. I think those of you that were part of London 2012 may remember that Great Britain, Ben Pipes attacked a ball from Dan Hunter that was right in front of where Dan Hunter was almost stood next to the first referee when he set the ball across the court to Ben Pipes, and Ben Pipes completely forgot that it was coming from Dan and attacked it, and the referees didn't whistle it for some reason. I do remember the debrief went on for some considerable time, which is why I remember that it occurred. So it does occur, particularly where it's marginal. But most liberos know exactly where they are and what they can and cannot do. So it's not often that you will get this this situation whereby it's so obvious that the libero plays the ball like that. But let's have a look at another example. So there's the libero contact. Okay, just watch it again. Okay, so this is a clear example of when this is not a fault. Okay, the libero has not made a controlled overhand finger pass. Okay, and therefore this should not have been called as a fault. Okay, the libero is stretching because the ball is going to go over their head if they don't do so, and they've just about reached it, so they've kept the ball in play. Okay, and then the player has attacked it. But this is a situation that the rule is not expected to be called a fault. This is not the spirit of the rule. The spirit of the rule is the Slovenian team's set clear, precise overhand finger pass. So it's very important to know the difference as to whether the libero is making a clear pass or whether they are just keeping the ball in play or keeping the ball alive. Okay, so you just need to understand the difference between the two situations. So let's just have a look at this one again. The libero, I think here, believes that he was legal, as you can see by his reaction towards the first referee. Okay. Yeah, and you can see that the libero is a little bit, knows the rules and believes that that shouldn't have been a fault, but doesn't make too much of it, which is good for him. Okay, and then you get other situations. Okay, I'm only going to watch the first one. You won't be surprised. It's quite an old clip. It's of Brazil. It's of Sergio. And Sergio made an absolute art form of becoming the offsetter for Brazil. Let's go back and look at the Sergio one again. So in this example, we've clearly got a libero who knows exactly where the front zone is and knows that he cannot enter the front zone. Now, Sergio made this part of his game, and it was something which he did an awful lot. And there are lots and lots of examples on YouTube of Sergio doing this. And it was the same situation that Great Britain used in the run up to the Olympic Games when they realised that Dan Hunter was a pretty good volleyer of the ball, and he also had a good understanding of where he was on the court and when he could and could not volley the ball. So if you see this situation, you will see. I was trying to find a clip of a libero having their foot in the front zone and realizing and taking their foot out of the front zone before they volleyed the ball to make sure they were in the back zone. Most liberos know exactly where they are, and it's very rare for a situation to occur. It's normally the attacking player's error rather than the libero's when you see the libero make this fault occur. Okay, so just be aware that it's the last contact with the court, the feet, that determines where the libero is. And the same with the attacking player, and that there are liberos that are as good as Sergio is of playing this ball and volleying in the front zone. So I've just got a couple of questions then for the next video. I want you to have a look at it and then give me some thoughts. Okay, so if you were the referee, what would be your decision, first and foremost? And secondly, consider different situations. What you're going to see is you're going to see a ball which is played from a libero, and that libero is in the front zone or steps into the front zone, and they play the ball a little bit of an overpass, and the ball is attacked higher than the top of the net simultaneously with a block. Okay, now this situation brings a lot of. Let's watch the video and then come back to the follow-up. Okay, let's watch it again. So this is USA. So the libero's clearly jumped in. So what do we think?
Nacho, you'd like to share your thoughts?
I think it's illegal. It's a fault by the what is it? The team in white, whatever they are.
Yep, USA.
Because the attack hit was completed the moment the block touched the ball.
Correct. That's the interpretation of it. So the reason that this video is very good for considering this situation is would your decision have changed if the blocker had touched the ball? If you thought the blocker had touched the ball first, what would your decision have been then?
No, it wouldn't change.
Why wouldn't it change?
Because the moment the blocker touches the ball is when the attack hit is completed, and that's when the fault becomes a fault.
Yeah. Okay. So if the blocker touched the ball first and not the USA number 7, then the attack hit was the play by the libero. So was the libero's play legal or illegal?
Oh, I see. I see.
I think it's legal because it's not the ball is not higher than the top of the net, no?
Absolutely. So in this situation, you've got a decision to make as the first referee as to whether you believe the block touched the ball first, in which case the play is legal and you just allow it to continue, or whether the contact is simultaneous. So if it's simultaneous, then the attack hit is by number 7 because it simultaneously completes with the block, and therefore it's a fault because it's come from an overhand finger pass by the libero in the front zone and it's higher than the top of the net. If you think that, so it depends on where the ball is, who contacts it first, and what's happening. So in that situation, if you think that the ball is, let's say the ball is still on the USA side of it's in the USA space, and the blocker touches the ball first. In that situation, what do you think the fault is there? Or is there no fault?
It could be a fault because if the USA player can actually hit it or attack it, then the ball is still in play, even though it hasn't crossed the net. You still you don't call it just yet.
Okay, so if the ball is still in the USA space when the blocker touches it, then the question you've got to ask yourself is number 7 going to make an attack hit, and has that attack hit opportunity been impacted by the blocker contacting the ball first? And therefore you may have going through your mind as first referee that in that situation the fault is against the blocker for playing the ball in the opponent's space, i.e. reaching beyond the net, because number 7 wasn't able to execute an attack hit. So with this sort of example, it's very good that you can stop the ball and think about whether the ball is in the USA space, it's over the top of the net, or it's in the Polish space. And if it's contacted by the blocker first or the attacker first, or both simultaneously, does your decision on what the fault is differ? And it's quite a good example for just playing it through in your mind as to, well, if that player didn't contact it simultaneously with the blocker and the blocker had contacted it first, then the play was legal. If the player played the ball first, then clearly it's a fault. So if number 7 plays the ball before the blocker, it's clearly a fault because the ball's above the top of the net. It's come for an overhand finger pass by the libero in the front zone. If the ball is still in the USA space and the blocker touches it, then you have a different scenario. And it's one of those situations whereby you've got probably 5 or 6 different outcomes depending on what might occur. So let's just have a quick look at it again, and then I'll come back to my questions. Okay, so in this instance, Avellino here has he has had a chat with Ibrahim, the second referee, and the second referee says to him, look, that was clearly the libero in the front zone, therefore, you need to change your decision. This is obviously before referees were mic'd. Okay. And this is a rule which actually I think is changing in 2022. It's in the rules where they remove the word simultaneous, I think, from the contact. They talk about contacting the ball before the opponent, not simultaneously with the opponent. So watch out for us talking about this one again in the future. But with this situation, just think about the different permutations about what could have happened. So let's just watch it once more. Okay. So yeah, this is a clear example of the libero there. So thinking about those different situations, if you lay it out and say, okay, where's the libero? Is it the libero or isn't it the libero? Where is the position of the ball? Is it in the attack side? Is it over the net or is it on the block side? Where is the height of the ball? Is it above the net or is it below the net? And who contacts it first? Is it the attacker or the blocker or is it simultaneous? And then you get a whole different scenarios, situations that could occur, and whether the fault is one way or the other. And it's quite, it gets quite complicated. So as first referees in this situation, you just have to be clear about what you believe has happened, be clear about where the fault occurs or no fault occurs, and then be clear with your decision in this situation. And if you have to, use your second referee. What was their view of it? Don't always listen to don't take the advice of the players. just take the information that you've got. Okay, where did it come from? Was the ball over the top of the net? Yes, it was. Where was the position of the libero? Front zone. Okay, was it attacked? Yes, it was. Okay, fault. And just go through that process. Similarly with the other back row attack faults. Was the back row player in the front zone? Yes. Was the ball higher than the top of the net? Yes, it was. Did the attack hit complete? Yes, it did. Fault. Yeah, and just go through that process so that you make those judgments. Now, there will be times when you're not sure whether it was a back row player or not, and you may call it a bit late. So you may not call it as soon as the ball crosses the plane of the net or the block contacts it. You may call it maybe a few contacts later. But you've got the right decision. So in this situation, it's just one of those ones where be aware of it, use your information that you've got from your colleague, your second referee, or if you're second referee, you can take that, you can look to your first referee to say, well, did you see that? All right, okay, I'm going to call it. Okay. So those are the opportunities you've got. And the point I'm trying to make with the possible solutions from this video, and this video is in the casebook, by the way, it's 9.6 in the casebook, is that there are lots of permutations that could happen in just one simple play between three players and a ball, and where they are on the court regarding the attack hit fault flaw. Okay, so on to the casebook examples. I suppose Stuart, have we got any questions?
There were a few earlier on. I don't know if you wanted to wait to the end. There was one that popped in on Twitter and one I just picked up from the chat. Actually, no, I think you answered that actually later on. It was one from Tim. So no, probably best to continue for now, Nick, if that's right. Okay.
All right. So I've only pulled out 6 casebook examples. I think this is probably all there are in there about this, and most of it we've talked about. So 3.33, the back row set a jump from within the front zone and set the ball while it was completely higher than the top of the net, directing it towards an attacker. Before the attacker contacted the ball, it penetrated the vertical plane of the net where it was blocked by the opponent's setter. Was there a fault? Who wants to answer that one?
Good. You'd like to give it a go? You should be able to unmute yourself at the top of the little microphone.
Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah, so basically, it's not a fault because once the ball has penetrated from the plane of the net, then he's entitled to play the ball.
Okay, so just think about it again. A back row setter jumped from within the front zone and set the ball while it was completely higher than the top of the net, directing it towards an attacker. Before the attacker could contact the ball, it penetrated the vertical plane of the net.
Yeah, it's an attack hit.
It's still the same team's point, but it's the fault of the back row setter because it was front court.
Correct.
It's going across the net then to attack it, and therefore.
Yeah. So this is the point I made earlier about the be aware that the back row setter in setting the ball could either be a perfect set to the attacker, or it could be an attack hit if it crosses the vertical plane of the net. So in this instance, the block by the opponent's setter completes the attack hit, okay, and therefore the fault is an illegal back row attack by the setter that contacted the ball, okay. So the second one is on a second hit, a player passed the ball near to the net towards the opponent's court. In the first referee's opinion, no player of A could possibly reach the ball. The blocker of B reached across the plane of the net and blocked the ball. Was this the correct decision of the first referee?
Lord, I noticed you got your hand up there. Is it maybe from the tell away facial reactions from the last time? Is anybody else like to give it a go? Herman, I can see you're on mute. I don't know if you're primed, ready to go, or just left it unmuted from last time.
No, I'll come back in a sec, sorry.
We've got no volunteers for this one.
What was the decision of the first referee to allow it, or what?
Yeah, so in this instance, the first referee has allowed the block of B, who's reached into the playing space of A to block the ball, and it's only on the second hit.
Yeah, in that case, he is correct because there was no player that could reach the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no player can reach the ball. So regardless of the fact it's the second hit, it's going towards the opponent, and therefore the opponent is quite right within their rights to block it and therefore complete the attack hit. Okay, in this instance. So the fact that it was the second hit has no bearing on it. The ball can't be played again by the team of A, so therefore it's fine. Okay, you will get yourself into if you called this one differently, you get yourself into a lot of issues with the players. I think it's absolutely a different situation if the ball is not going to cross the plane of the net. Absolutely a different situation if the ball is not going to cross the plane of the net. Then the blocker doesn't have the right to play the ball. Okay, so you just have to make that decision about, is it a block or not a block? Is it an attack hit or not an attack hit? Okay. So the bottom one there is a back row player took off from the front zone and as a second hit spiked the ball, which was completely higher than the top of the net. The ball rebounded from the net band and did not cross to the opponent. Is this a fault?
No, it's not a fault.
Thank you, Di. That's absolutely correct. The ball is still in play at this point. Okay, so it could be retrieved from the net by a player and who would produce some great skill to get it through the crossing space, but it's still in play. So yeah, absolutely, it's not a fault because again, this is a clear situation as the attack hit has not been completed, and therefore it's not a fault. Okay, so next one. Team A's receiver jumped from behind the attack line and contacted the served ball from completely higher than the top of the net. The contact was behind the attack line and the ball returned to the serving team's side of the net. Should play continue?
Steve, did you want to tackle this one? I did see your hand was up for the last one. Maybe the case then it was left up from the last question. Tim, I see your hand is promptly shot up as well. Would you like to give it a go?
Yeah.
Oh.
In the front zone. So if the ball is in the front zone, this is a fault.
Yeah. Okay. So you're remembering that because it's a service, attacking the service, it's the position of the ball. Okay. The ball has to be in the front zone. Okay, and entirely higher than the top of the net for this to be a fault. So this is now saying that because the receiver jumped from behind in the back zone, behind the attack line, and contacted the serve ball, the ball was in the back zone as well. Yeah, at the time the contact was made. So therefore, play continues. So yes, correct. So 5.26, you saw the video of this one. Receiving a fake attack by the setter of Team B, the ball was played with the fingers of one hand over the head of the libero of Team A standing in the front zone. This ball was then spiked by a teammate completely over the height of the net at the moment of the hit. What is the consideration of the judgment if this action was legal or illegal?
Tim, I think it might be a case that you might have left your hand up again, but what should the referees consider in this decision, do you think? No, I see pop your hand down there. Anybody else like to tackle this one? Give it a go.
Nick, can I just clarify something?
Yep.
Sorry, I can't find my hands up thing because I keep switching my mouse off. It's the one from the video where he played it with one hand. Is
Yes.
that right?
Yes.
Yes. Therefore, it's legal because it says overhand finger pass, which takes it as being a volley.
Correct. That's absolutely so. That's the key point that is made from this casebook example and that video, is that the libero must be making a controlled volley for this to be a fault. Okay, so in this instance, with one hand, this is not a fault. Okay, so just remember that you'll get challenged on it on court. You have to make a judgment as to whether the libero plays the ball in a controlled manner or whether the libero is under some sort of duress or has made to make a spectacular play to do it, or the ball has been hit hard at them and they've done a reactionary play just to try and fend the ball off. Yeah. And then 9.6, this last one. This is the one.
Sorry, Nick,
sorry.
if I may interrupt. Very extreme, but what if that libero is just very skilled and very good at setting with one hand?
I think you'd be able to know the difference between what is a really good. So in that situation that we saw in the video, the ball was going over the libero's head, and the libero had to really stretch to play the ball and to keep it in play. Yeah. So in that instance, then it's not controlled. Okay. Now you may argue that if the libero can get to the ball, then he's going to put some sort of control on it. If he's still kept the ball in the middle of the court in the front zone, then there must be some sort of control there. But the spirit of this rule is that it has to just simply be a controlled overhand finger pass with both hands, a typical set volley for this to be a fault.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Everything else you can pretty much allow. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay, and then this last one, 9.6, this is the situation with the libero and the two players simultaneously over the top of the net. So we've talked quite a bit about that one, so we won't go through that one now. So that's it. It's over to you for any questions that have come in. That would, if you've got any, happy to go through those now.
As Nick mentioned, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat or pop your hand up, or there'll be a moment and ask your questions if you've got any. To ask. There was one that came in from Twitter, Nick. I'm not quite sure if it was a bit misplaced and it was more generally about the rules overall. I think it was a bit more general, to be honest. It said we would like some clarification on the screening rule as this pops up every season for our team. That, to me, in my knowledge, it sounds like more of a general rules question rather than specifically for this topic, but.
Yeah. So the screening rule is it is being clarified yet again in the next set of rules. It shows how much we thought we'd clarified it last time. We clearly hadn't. So the screening rule is quite simply, if the serving team screens both the server and the flight of the ball, they must screen both of those from the receiving team, then it's a screen. If the ball can be seen in its flight by the receiving team, but they can't see the server, it's not a screen. If they can see the server and then momentarily miss the flight of the ball for a little while, again, it's not a screen. And quite simply, if the server throws the ball above their head, then it's not going to be a screen. So the rule is being clarified yet again to labour those points that it must be both of these situations in order for that to occur. But quite simply, if the player is standing on the serving side waving their arms, for example, then in that situation, first time you see it, that you could call that quite easily a screen, because they really have to understand that that's not acceptable, and they won't get away with it. But in most other situations, as we talked about when we talked about screens, you have to call them early in the game. It's no point identifying a screen in set 4 or 5. You've got to call it in the sort of first 10 points of the match or the first rotation of both teams, because it'll have occurred then, it'll occur every time. So but again, it's not something which I can't remember the last time I called a screen.
Thank you, Nick. Nacho, you got your hand up there, you'd like to ask a question?
Yes, you kind of tiptoed on it, but I was going to ask about that video you mentioned where the libero is standing with one foot on the front zone, one foot on the back zone.
Yep.
And he realizes and then lifts one foot. That's kind of unrulable, right? There's no clear decision there, because on one hand you have one foot on the ground, but the other one, the last contact was on fault.
Yeah, and I think what you need to do in that situation is you need to look at the action of the libero. So if you see the libero consciously withdraw the foot into the air and then kind of reset on the leg they're standing on, and then play the ball, then you can go, this is a conscious action not to be in the front zone. I think if the libero just picks their foot up off the front zone by a couple of inches, then you can quite clearly say, that's not good enough to say that you're withdrawn yourself from the front zone. But if they take that foot out of the front zone and then almost push again with their standing leg to get their position, still standing on one leg, then you would say that's clear. That's two elements to that play. The libero is clearly taking themselves back. They don't have time to get their foot back down into the back zone, because they don't have time to do that. They've consciously know that they're in the front zone. So what they've done is they've lifted that leg out and then they've played the ball. There is enough gap between the two to say to you that there is a clear action by the libero to take themselves out of the front zone. If, as I say, if they suddenly realise they've got their foot on the ground in the front zone, they're just about to play the ball and they just lift it off the ground, no, that's not good enough. That would still be a fault.
Right. Okay.
I'll see if I can find the video for that. It's been used a while, so I need to find it.
Yeah, I think we discussed it.
In the list.
It was discussed in one of the referee meetings.
We've used it in a referee conference before, so I know I've got it somewhere. I just need to find it.
Awesome. Rita, you did have your hand up there.
No, Nick just said it. I was just going to say that we'd used, I think it was a couple of referee conferences ago. I think Nick actually did the presentation, and there was some setter deliberately lifted his front court leg off the ground.
Yeah.
So I remember there was a great debate at the conference about it.
Yeah.
So there's just one last hand up then, Tim. Would you like to ask away? Oh, two hands. So too soon.
Okay. The question was, in every other situation, according to the rules, it is the last box is an exception.
Tim, I don't know if it's just me, but I think we lost you a little bit in the middle there. I think your signal broke up.
Okay, I'll try. Yeah, I've got a very good line here. I'm keep breaking up.
Tim, if you pop it in the chat,
I'm just saying.
I'll ask if that's okay.
Okay, I'll put in the chat.
Yeah, is that okay? Awesome. Thanks.
Yep, can do.
Steve, I think your hand was up next, and then I'll get around to Tim's question if he popped it in by then.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? It's the first question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a distinction when the ball is crossing the net? Is there a distinction between penetrating the vertical plane and crossing the vertical plane? To my mind, penetrating is a wee bit of the ball is peeking over into the opponent's court. Crossing is completely crossing and completely in the opponent's court.
Yep, absolutely. So if we go back to get to the next one. So the key point here is on the attack hit is that the attack hit is completed when the ball completely crosses the vertical plane of the net. So this is not just being over the net. This is now, it is no longer in your playing space, it's in your opponent's playing space. It's got to completely cross, the whole ball has got to have crossed the vertical plane of the net or be touched by an opponent for this to, for an attack hit to be completed.
Right, okay. So when we were looking at the Casebook 333, I thought the view was that the blocker, the back court setter had committed a foul, had committed a fault if.
Yeah. So I get your point. So the Casebook example said it had penetrated the vertical plane of the net where it was blocked.
Yeah.
So because it was blocked, the blocking action completes the attack hit.
But the ball hasn't completely crossed the net.
No, but it doesn't have to for a block, does it? Because you're allowed to block the ball in the opponent's space.
Yeah, the block is legal, but what I'm suggesting is that the attack. The slightly misguided set is not illegal. I thought we said. I thought the conclusion was that the set was a fault.
Yes, the set is a fault because the conditions for an attack hit fault have been satisfied in that the player is a back row player in the front zone. They've contacted the ball higher than the top of the net, and it's been directed towards the opponent and has crossed. That has penetrated the vertical plane of the net where it has been blocked. So in that instance, the ball becomes an attack hit as soon as it is blocked.
But the ball might not even have been going into the opponent's court just because a wee bit of it is poking over the net.
Right. So in that instance, if the ball wasn't going towards the opponent's court, okay, at any stage, and it didn't penetrate the vertical plane of the net, then the blocker would be at fault for reaching beyond the net.
Well, no, we've said the blocker is touching the wee bit of the ball that is over the net.
Yeah, so in that instance, then as soon as the ball has penetrated the vertical plane of the net, the blocker can touch it.
Right. But what I'm saying is that the setter has not committed a fault because his set is not. May not be going towards the opponent's court.
Well, yeah, but I think in this instance, what they're saying, trying to get the point across, is that say the setter is a couple of feet off the off the net, and they're trying to set the ball, say, to their attacker on a wing position, but instead of setting the ball parallel to the net, they've actually set the ball towards the opponent court. Okay, and therefore, before it's got to the attacker, their last third team hit, the ball has already penetrated the vertical plane of the net, and in so doing, it's been blocked, which makes it an attack hit.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Right, thank you, Tim, for popping your question in the chat. I'll just read it out and then I'll go on to that last hands up, if that's okay. So Tim said, in every other situation in the rules, it is the last position of the feet that determine where contact with the floor, determine their contact with the floor, sorry. So why is this rule an exception?
Right, can you say it again for me?
No, sorry. In every other situation in the rules, it is the last position of the feet that determine their contact with the floor. So why is this rule an exception?
Okay, we're talking about if the libero withdraws himself from the front zone here. Because normally, with everything, yes, absolutely, the last foot contact with the floor determines the player's position on the court. So in this instance, what we're talking about is the whole point of spectacularity, of seeing plays that continue to allow the ball to keep the ball flying, etc. So in this instance, we've been talking about a libero who has recognized that if they stand with both feet on the floor, they will be committing a fault when they have contacted the ball. So they have the presence of mind to try and rectify that situation by attempting to bring themselves back into the back zone and then push off from their foot, which is in the back zone. And that means that it's almost like it's a separate action by the libero. It's quite difficult to talk about if we can't see the video, so maybe it's my fault for actually introducing it and talking about it. But in that situation, it would only be the very cleverest of liberos that would be able to do this, I think. But it's a clear situation whereby, when you've looked at Sergio, for example, where if you look at videos of Sergio quite often has taken off with 1 foot or 2 feet, depending on where he knows he is in the court. So he knows that if he has 2 feet on the ground, he will be illegal. So he only takes off with 1 foot, or he knows that he's totally legal. So he's able to take off with 2 feet and jump that far into the front zone to set the ball. So this is a situation whereby the libero has recognized they've gone too far and they are trying to withdraw themselves when they then play the ball. And in that situation, you have to make a judgment as to whether you believe that the libero is consciously making themselves trying to be legal, or whether the libero has simply just stayed where they were and just lifted their foot. In this instance, I think we're talking about a libero who's attempting to get back into the back zone, but doesn't have time to get their second foot back down on the court again before they have to play the ball. I will definitely see if I can find the video so that it will show you what I mean, what we've been talking about. Maybe it's my fault for bringing it up, but that's
Thanks, Nick. And then Lud, you've got your hand up there. One last question.
Might be a slightly silly one, Nick. If you're Mazursky, can you volley the ball from the backcourt illegally while standing on the floor? Bearing in mind he's 7'3", so by the time he gets his arms above his head, it'll be above the height of the net.
Correct. So if Mazursky, for example, is back row and he steps into the front zone and volleys the ball over while stood on the ground, then all you have to, as a referee, all you're doing is you're saying, okay, where is the position of the player? Where is the position of the ball? So is the player in the front zone? Is the ball above the height of the net? As those two elements have been satisfied, it's an illegal back row attack.
Has anyone ever called that, or is it
I don't know. I wouldn't know whether he's been called that or not. Actually, I don't think he's ever probably had the situation where he's needed to needed to volley a ball from the front zone when he's back row. But yeah, in that situation, if the player is tall enough, then absolutely, and they have to know that that's the rule. So
quite a few setters now, aren't there?
There are absolutely, yeah. So you have to be, it's as I said, that it's not automatic if a player is in the air that the ball will be higher than the top of the net. In the senior men's game, it's not automatic that if the player stood on the ground that he's not higher than the top of the net. So you have to look at the situation and make that decision. I've not seen an example where a really tall back row player has been stood in the front zone and just volleyed the ball over. I'm sure there must be somewhere. I'll see if I can see if I know some of my colleagues might have a video of that if it's occurred. But it's a situation that could occur, absolutely.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay, is that it? Okay, so I think thank you very much for your attentiveness again. It's great that you've made the effort to come to these sessions, and therefore it makes me keen to continue to do them. I see that there's a need, which is really good. So the next one we're going to talk about the block and Rule 14. So that will be on the 10th of March. And I look forward to seeing you then.